A billionaire with terminal cancer had 6 months to live. Every doctor said there was no hope. Then a homeless boy on a street corner made him an impossible offer: "I can heal you." The millionaire laughed and said, "I'll give you my entire fortune if you can." The boy simply touched him, and everything changed. What happened next defies medical explanation. CTA 015 to 030. Before I tell you this incredible true story of healing and transformation, tell me, what city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button because powerful, life-changing stories like this are shared here every week. Now let me tell you about the day Thomas Blackwell's impossible healing began. Thomas Blackwell sat in the leather chair of his private office, staring at the medical report on his mahogany desk. The words blurred together, but 3 stood out with devastating clarity: terminal pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. At 55 years old, with a fortune worth $4 billion, he was dying. "There must be something," Thomas said to Dr. Harrison, who stood uncomfortably by the window. "Experimental treatments. Clinical trials. I'll pay anything." "Mr. Blackwell, we've explored every option. The cancer is too advanced. It's spread to your liver, your lymph nodes. Surgery isn't viable. Chemotherapy would only make your remaining time miserable." Dr. Harrison's voice was professional but gentle. "I'm sorry. I wish I had better news." Thomas dismissed him with a wave. Alone, he looked around his office. Walls lined with awards, photos with presidents and celebrities, evidence of a life spent accumulating power and wealth. None of it mattered now. Money couldn't buy him more time. The pain had started 6 months ago. Sharp stabs in his abdomen that he'd ignored, attributing them to stress. By the time he'd finally seen a doctor, it was too late. Now the pain was constant, managed only by increasingly strong medications that left him foggy and exhausted. Thomas had built his empire from nothing. Orphaned at 15, he'd worked 3 jobs, put himself through business school, and clawed his way to the top of the pharmaceutical industry. He'd crushed competitors, made ruthless decisions, sacrificed relationships for success. And for what? To die alone in an office tower? His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Blackwell, your ex-wife is on line 3. Tell her I'm unavailable." Thomas had been married twice, divorced twice. No children. He'd been too busy building his empire. His family consisted of lawyers, accountants, and employees who feared him more than respected him. That evening, unable to face his empty penthouse, Thomas walked the streets of Manhattan. The pain medication made everything feel distant, dreamlike. He found himself in a neighborhood he didn't recognize, run down, far from the gleaming towers of his usual world. A small crowd had gathered around a street corner. Curious despite himself, Thomas pushed through to see what had drawn their attention. In the center sat a boy, maybe 16 or 17, with dark skin and earnest eyes. His clothes were worn but clean. Before him on the pavement was a cardboard sign: "Free healing. No charge. Just faith." Thomas laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. A faith healer. A con artist preying on desperate people. He'd seen dozens of these charlatans over the years, promising miracles for money. But something made him stop. The boy's eyes met his, and Thomas saw something unexpected: genuine compassion, without pity or judgment. "You're in pain," the boy said simply. Not a question. A statement. "What's it to you?" Thomas snapped. "I can help. If you'll let me." The boy stood, shorter than Thomas by several inches, but somehow seeming larger. "No payment required. Just your willingness to receive." The crowd murmured. Thomas noticed some had tears in their eyes, others looked at the boy with something like reverence. An elderly woman clutched her formerly arthritic hands, flexing fingers that clearly no longer hurt. "This is a scam," Thomas said loudly. "You people are fools." "Perhaps," the boy said calmly. "But their pain is real. And now it's less. What does it matter what you call it?" Thomas felt anger rise, anger at his diagnosis, his helplessness, this boy's infuriating serenity. "Fine. Heal me then. I have terminal cancer. 6 months to live. Let's see your miracle." The crowd gasped. The boy didn't flinch. I can try. But healing requires openness. Your skepticism is a wall I cannot penetrate. Convenient excuse for when you fail. Thomas pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card. Here's my offer, Faith Healer. Come to my office tomorrow. If you can heal me, actually heal me, verified by my doctors, I'll give you my entire fortune. $4 billion. But when you fail, you stop this con game. Deal. The boy looked at the card, then at Thomas. I don't want your money, Mr. Blackwell. But I'll come. Tomorrow at noon. Thomas walked away, already regretting his impulsive challenge. The pain flared in his abdomen, sharp and unforgiving. He swallowed another pill and tried to forget the strange encounter. But that night, he dreamed of the boy's eyes, dark, deep, knowing. And for the first time in months, Thomas felt something other than despair. He felt curiosity. Thomas barely slept. He told himself it was the pain, but truthfully, he couldn't stop thinking about the boy. At dawn, he called Dr. Harrison and arranged for a full medical team to be present at noon. If this was going to happen, it would be documented, witnessed, scientifically verified. What exactly are we witnessing? Dr. Harrison asked on the phone. Either a miracle or a fraud. Either way, I want evidence. Thomas paused. And Harrison, keep this quiet. If word gets out that Thomas Blackwell is consulting faith healers, my board will have me declared incompetent. By 11:30, his office had been transformed into a makeshift examination room. 3 doctors, 2 nurses, medical equipment for immediate testing. Thomas's assistant looked bewildered but followed instructions without question. At precisely noon, the boy arrived. He looked even younger in daylight, dressed in the same worn clothes from the night before. He showed no intimidation at the corporate setting, the medical personnel, Thomas's obvious wealth and power. I'm Elijah, the boy said, extending his hand. Thomas shook it reflexively, surprised by the warmth and strength of the grip. Thomas Blackwell. But you knew that. Thomas gestured to the doctors. Before we begin this, whatever this is, they're going to examine me. Document my current condition. When you fail, I want proof of how sick I actually am. I understand, Elijah said simply. For the next hour, the medical team put Thomas through every test imaginable. Blood draws, scans, physical examination. The pain was excruciating, even through the medication. By the end, Thomas was sweating and pale. Dr. Harrison reviewed the results with undisguised concern. Mr. Blackwell, your numbers are worse than last week. The cancer is progressing aggressively. I strongly recommend we discuss palliative care and... Later, Thomas interrupted. First, let's see what the miracle worker can do. The room cleared except for Elijah, Thomas, and Dr. Harrison, who insisted on staying as an observer. Thomas sat in his chair, exhausted and in agony, feeling foolish for entertaining this charade. What now? Thomas asked. Do you need crystals? Incense? A chicken to sacrifice? Elijah smiled gently. Just permission to touch you. And an open mind, if possible. My mind is closed. My body is dying. Do your worst. Elijah approached and knelt beside Thomas's chair. He placed his hands on Thomas's abdomen, right where the pain burned hottest. His touch was light, warm, nothing mystical or dramatic. What are you? Thomas started to say, then stopped. Heat. Intense but not painful, spreading from Elijah's hands through Thomas's torso. The constant, grinding pain that had been his companion for months began to ease. Not disappear, but soften, as if someone had turned down the volume. What is this? Thomas whispered. What are you doing? Removing blockages. Allowing your body to remember what health feels like. Elijah's eyes were closed, his face peaceful. Your body wants to heal, Mr. Blackwell. It's trying. But you've been fighting it with fear and anger for so long, you've forgotten how. The heat intensified. Thomas felt something shift inside him, not physically, but deeper. Emotional walls he'd built over decades began to crack. He saw flashes of memory, himself at 15, terrified and alone after his parents' death. At 25, closing his first major deal and feeling empty instead of triumphant. At 40, signing divorce papers and wondering why success tasted like ash. "Stop," Thomas gasped. "Stop it. I don't want." "You don't want to feel," Elijah said softly, not removing his hands. "You've spent your life building walls. But walls that keep out pain also keep out healing. You have to choose, Mr. Blackwell. Die protected, or live vulnerable." Thomas felt tears on his face, the first tears he'd shed since his mother's funeral 40 years ago. The pain in his abdomen was almost gone, replaced by that strange heat. But the emotional pain was overwhelming. Years of loneliness, regret, fear he'd never acknowledged. "I don't know how," Thomas admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to be vulnerable. I only know how to be strong." "Strength isn't the absence of vulnerability," Elijah said, opening his eyes. "It's the courage to feel everything and keep going anyway. Your body is strong, Mr. Blackwell. Strong enough to fight this cancer, if you let it. But first, you have to stop fighting yourself." Elijah removed his hands and stood. Thomas sat frozen, feeling the warmth fade but the absence of pain remain. For the first time in 6 months, he wasn't hurting. "How do you feel?" Dr. Harrison asked, stepping forward with obvious skepticism mixed with hope. "I feel different. Better. The pain is gone." Thomas stood, testing his body, expecting the pain to return. "It didn't." "What did you do to me?" "I did nothing. You did it yourself. I just reminded your body what health feels like." Elijah moved toward the door. "But Mr. Blackwell, physical healing is only part of the journey. The cancer grew from somewhere. From years of stress, anger, isolation. If you don't heal that, it will return." "Wait," Thomas called. "You're leaving? Don't you want to verify the healing? Collect your $4 billion. I told you, I don't want your money. And verification will come. Give it a week, then have your doctors test you again. The proof will be in your blood." Elijah paused at the door. "But money won't heal what truly ails you, Mr. Blackwell. Only connection can do that. Only love." He left, leaving Thomas standing in his office, pain-free for the first time in months, tears drying on his face, feeling more confused and shaken than any business deal had ever made him feel. "Impossible," Dr. Harrison muttered, checking his equipment. "Completely impossible. But Mr. Blackwell, you look better. Your color is improved. You're standing straighter. I need to run more tests immediately." "Later," Thomas said, still staring at the door where Elijah had disappeared. "First, I need to think." For the rest of the day, Thomas sat alone in his office, not working, not making calls. Just sitting. Feeling. The absence of physical pain was remarkable, but the presence of emotional awareness was terrifying. What had that boy done to him? And more importantly, what came next? Thomas didn't sleep that night either, but for different reasons. The pain remained absent. He took no medication, half expecting the agony to return, but it didn't. More unsettling was the emotional rawness Elijah had left behind. 40 years of suppressed feelings demanded attention. At 3 a.m., Thomas found himself looking through old photo albums he'd kept in storage. His parents, young and happy before the accident that killed them. Himself as a teenager, eyes hollow with grief and determination. His first wife, Sarah, on their wedding day, still believing he could learn to love openly. "I'm sorry," Thomas whispered to the photographs. "I'm sorry I didn't know how to be what you needed." Morning came. Thomas canceled his meetings and went back to the street corner where he'd met Elijah. The boy wasn't there. A homeless man sat against the building, and Thomas approached him. "The healer kid, Elijah. Do you know where I can find him?" The homeless man studied him. "You got money?" Thomas pulled out his wallet, then paused. Money. Always his first solution. He put the wallet away. "No. But I need to find him. He helped me, and I need to talk to him." The man's expression softened. "He stays at St. Mary's Shelter 3 blocks north. But he won't take your money, if that's what you're offering. Kids got principles." Thomas found St. Mary's, a rundown building that served meals and provided beds for the city's forgotten. Inside, the smell of industrial soup and unwashed bodies hit him. His instinct was to leave, but he forced himself forward. Elijah was serving lunch, ladling soup into bowls with a smile for each person who passed. When he saw Thomas, surprise flickered across his face, then pleasure. "Mr. Blackwell, I didn't expect to see you again. The pain hasn't returned. Dr. Harrison ran tests this morning. My tumor markers are down 40%. In one day. He can't explain it." Thomas watched Elijah serve another bowl. "I can't explain it either. Does everything need explanation? Can't some things simply be accepted? I've spent my life demanding explanations. Evidence. Proof." Thomas grabbed a ladle. "But maybe you're right. Maybe I should start with acceptance. Can I help?" Elijah's smile widened. "You want to serve soup? I want to understand you. Understanding requires perspective. And frankly, I have no idea what to do with myself today." For the next 3 hours, Thomas Blackwell, billionaire pharmaceutical CEO, served lunch to homeless people. It was humbling, exhausting, and strangely satisfying. People thanked him with genuine gratitude. Some told him stories. One elderly veteran talked about his service in Vietnam. A young woman shared how she'd lost her job and apartment in the same week. Thomas listened. Really listened, without thinking about his next meeting or checking his phone. Without judging or planning or strategizing. Just being present. After the lunch rush, Elijah and Thomas sat in a quiet corner with their own bowls of soup. "How did you learn to heal?" Thomas asked. "I didn't learn. It's always been there, like breathing. My grandmother had the gift too. She taught me that healing isn't about fixing people, it's about helping them remember their own wholeness." "But you can't heal everyone. Some people die despite the best care." "Physical death isn't failure," Elijah said gently. "Sometimes the healing is spiritual. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's simply the gift of peace before passing. Not everyone is meant to survive their illness, Mr. Blackwell. But everyone deserves to feel whole before they go." Thomas absorbed this. "Why do you live here? At a homeless shelter? With your gift, you could charge thousands, live comfortably." "This is comfortable. These people are my family. Out there," Elijah gestured toward the window and the city beyond, "everyone wants something. Success, money, status. Here, people just want connection. Truth. Someone to see them. That's more valuable than any fortune. I've spent 40 years chasing fortune. Building an empire. And I've never felt as satisfied as I did serving soup today. What's wrong with me?" "Nothing's wrong with you," Elijah said with a laugh. "You're just remembering what matters. Most people forget along the way. Money becomes a substitute for meaning. Power becomes a substitute for connection. You're not sick because of cancer, Mr. Blackwell. You're sick because you've been living a half-life, and your body finally said, 'Enough.'" The words should have offended Thomas. Instead, they felt like liberation. "So what do I do now? Assuming I'm actually healing, assuming I get to live, what do I do with this second chance?" "That's not for me to decide. But I'll tell you what my grandmother told me. The cure for suffering is not isolation. It's connection. Find your people. Love them. Let them love you. Everything else is details." Thomas thought about his empty penthouse, his ex-wives, the colleagues who feared him, the family he'd never built. "I don't have people. I have employees and attorneys." "Then find people. Or let them find you." Elijah stood, collecting their bowls. "Mr. Blackwell, you offered me your fortune yesterday. I don't want it. But I'll make you a counteroffer. Give me your time instead. Come here twice a week. Serve meals. Talk to people. Learn what it means to give without expecting return. Do that for 3 months, and your healing will be complete, body, mind, and spirit." "That's all?" "Serve soup twice a week. It's harder than it sounds. For someone like you, presence is more difficult than writing a check." Elijah smiled. "But if you can do it, if you can truly show up without armor or agenda, you'll discover what your fortune never bought you: purpose." Thomas left St. Mary's as the sun set, his mind churning. That evening, he called Dr. Harrison and scheduled a complete battery of tests for the following week. Then he did something unprecedented. He called Sarah, his first ex-wife. "Thomas." Her voice was cautious. They hadn't spoken in 8 years. "Is everything okay?" "No. Yes. I was diagnosed with terminal cancer. But something happened. I met someone who... I'm healing, I think. But that's not why I called." Silence on the line. "I called to apologize," Thomas continued, "for being a terrible husband. For choosing work over you, over us, over every chance at happiness we had. You deserved better. I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you." He heard her breath catch. "Thomas, are you dying? Is this a deathbed apology?" "Maybe the opposite. Maybe I'm finally learning to live. And living requires acknowledging the past. So I'm sorry, Sarah. Truly sorry." They talked for an hour, really talked, sharing memories and regrets and forgiveness. When Thomas hung up, he felt lighter than he had in decades. That night, he dreamed of healing. Not his own, but healing relationships, healing mistakes, healing the parts of himself he'd abandoned in pursuit of success. When he woke, the pain was still absent. But more importantly, the emptiness that had filled him for years had begun, just barely, to fill with something else. Hope. 1 week after meeting Elijah, Thomas sat in Dr. Harrison's office for a follow-up. The medical team reviewed the results in silence, disbelief written on their faces. The scans showed the impossible. The pancreatic tumor had shrunk by 60%, and the liver metastases were nearly gone. "This doesn't happen," one doctor said. "And yet it did," Dr. Harrison replied. "Thomas, what did the boy do?" "He touched me, talked to me, and I changed how I live," Thomas said. "Maybe healing isn't only physical." The doctors wanted to publish the case, but Thomas refused. Elijah would not become an experiment. Some things, he believed, were meant to remain sacred. Later that day, Thomas returned to St. Mary's for his volunteer shift. Elijah greeted him as usual, calm and present. "It's strange," Thomas admitted. "I spent months preparing to die. Now I'm learning how to live." "That's the harder part," Elijah said. During lunch service, a young man thanked Thomas for the medication his company produced. It had saved his sister's life. The moment shook Thomas. 4 years, he'd seen numbers and profits, not people. Now, he finally saw faces. That night, Thomas called his ex-wife Rebecca. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only acknowledged the harm he'd caused. The conversation didn't heal everything, but it was honest, and that mattered. Over the following weeks, Thomas changed completely. He volunteered, reconnected with people he'd ignored, and treated those around him with genuine care. His health continued to improve, test after test confirming what seemed impossible. 8 weeks later, Dr. Harrison delivered the final news. The cancer was gone. Complete remission. "This doesn't happen," the doctor said again. "But it did," Thomas replied. He went straight to St. Mary's, finding Elijah in the garden. "I'm healed," Thomas said. Elijah smiled. "You remembered who you are. I only helped." Thomas looked at the garden, then thought of his old life, wealthy, powerful, and empty. "I don't want to go back," he said. "Then don't," Elijah replied. "Now your real journey begins." Thomas picked up a watering can and joined him, feeling, for the first time in decades, fully alive. 3 months after his diagnosis, Thomas Blackwell entered the boardroom of Blackwell Pharmaceuticals knowing this meeting would change everything. The directors watched him closely, relieved by his recovery, wary of his recent behavior. "I've called this meeting to announce significant changes," Thomas began. "My illness gave me a perspective I didn't have before." "What does this mean for the company?" the CFO asked. "It means we're changing our model," Thomas said calmly. "We're cutting prices on life-saving medications by 40%. We're creating a fund to provide free medicine to those who can't afford it. And we're shifting research away from highly profitable lifestyle drugs toward diseases affecting underserved populations." The room exploded with protests. Financial disaster. Shareholder revolt. Corporate suicide. "I built this company to save lives," Thomas said firmly. "Somewhere along the way, profit replaced purpose. That ends now. He laid out the data. We'll still be profitable, just less obscene. And we'll save more lives. The vote barely passed. Half the board resigned. Thomas replaced them with doctors, patient advocates, and ethicists. The media mocked him. Wall Street predicted collapse. Thomas didn't care. For the first time, success wasn't measured in stock prices, but in lives improved. At St. Mary's, Elijah listened quietly. "You're aligned now," Elijah said. "But your healing isn't finished." "I've changed everything," Thomas replied. "Everything except your isolation," Elijah said gently. "Serving isn't the same as vulnerability." Elijah pointed to a woman sitting alone. "That's Margaret. Go talk to her, not as a CEO. As Thomas." It terrified him more than any boardroom battle. They talked, honestly, awkwardly, deeply. Margaret shared her life as a nurse, the illness that ruined her financially, the loneliness that followed. Thomas shared his own story without armor or polish. "You're not alone in being alone," Margaret said when they parted. "The brave thing is admitting it." That night, Thomas didn't return to his penthouse. Within weeks, he moved into a modest brownstone in a neighborhood where people knew each other's names. His neighbor Frank welcomed him with cookies. A block party followed. Conversations. Laughter. Presents. For the first time in his adult life, Thomas felt something unfamiliar and grounding, belonging. Elijah's words echoed in his mind. The cure for suffering is connection. And Thomas was finally learning that truth, one vulnerable moment at a time. 6 months after his diagnosis, Thomas sat in a circle at St. Mary's with a group Elijah had started. People who'd experienced healing, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. There was Margaret, the former nurse. Jake, who'd beaten addiction. Maria, who'd survived domestic violence. And 5 others, each with their own story of transformation. "Welcome, everyone," Elijah began. "Tonight, we're talking about what comes after healing. The hard part isn't receiving healing, it's maintaining it. Living differently. Not falling back into old patterns." Thomas listened as others shared their struggles. Jake talked about the daily temptation of substances. Maria described how hard it was to trust again. Each story resonated with something in Thomas's own journey. When it was his turn, Thomas spoke honestly, "I'm cancer-free. My company is helping people instead of just extracting profit. I've moved to a real neighborhood with real neighbors. By every measure, I should be happy. But I'm still lonely. I still wake up at 3 a.m. feeling like something's missing." "What do you think is missing?" Elijah asked gently. "Purpose beyond myself. I changed my company, but I'm still just one man making business decisions. I want to do more. But I don't know what." Margaret spoke up. "You have resources most of us don't. Money, connections, power. What if you use them not just to change your company, but to change the system?" The idea sparked something in Thomas. That night, he couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, but from excitement. Ideas flooded his mind. By dawn, he had filled 3 notebooks with plans. The next week, Thomas announced the Blackwell Foundation, a $1 billion endowment dedicated to healthcare access. But not a traditional foundation. This one would be run by people like Margaret, Jake, and Maria. People who'd lived the problems they were trying to solve. "I'm providing the money," Thomas told the group. "But you're providing the wisdom. I've spent my life thinking I had all the answers because I had money. But money doesn't teach you what it's like to choose between medication and rent. You know that. You tell me what needs to change, and I'll fund it." The foundation launched with 3 initiatives: a free clinic network in underserved neighborhoods, a program to train formerly homeless people as healthcare advocates, and a campaign to pressure other pharmaceutical companies to lower prices. The work was fulfilling but exhausting. Thomas discovered that systemic change was harder than running a company. There were endless obstacles: bureaucracy, resistance from other industries, political pushback. Some days he wondered if it was worth the fight. On one particularly frustrating day, Thomas sat with Elijah in the St. Mary's garden, venting his frustrations. "I'm trying to help, but I keep hitting walls. The insurance companies won't cooperate. Politicians are in pharmaceutical pockets. Even people we're trying to help sometimes resist because they don't trust wealthy benefactors. I'm starting to understand why most rich people just write checks and walk away. But you're not most rich people, Elijah said, pruning tomato plants. You're someone who's tasted both death and rebirth. Someone who knows that real change requires presence, not just resources. It would be so much easier to just be rich and disconnected again. Easier, yes. But would you be alive? Really alive? Elijah looked at him directly. Thomas, healing gave you back your physical life. This work is giving you your spiritual life. It's supposed to be hard. Anything worth doing is. That evening, Thomas visited Frank and Helen next door. They'd become real friends over the months, playing cards weekly, sharing meals, watching each other's homes during trips. They knew about his cancer, his company, his foundation work. You look tired, Helen observed, pouring him tea in their cozy kitchen. I am. I'm trying to change healthcare in America. Some days I think I'm delusional. Frank laughed. Probably you are. But the best people usually are. The world doesn't change because of reasonable people accepting how things are. It changes because unreasonable people refuse to accept it. I just want to matter, Thomas said quietly. I want my life to have meant something beyond accumulating wealth. You already matter, Helen said firmly. You showed up to our block party. You helped Mrs. Chen fix her steps. You talked my grandson through his college applications. You matter because you're here, being a person, not because you're trying to save the world. The words settled into Thomas like seeds finding soil. He'd been so focused on grand gestures and systemic change that he'd forgotten the small, daily acts of connection that Elijah had taught him. That night, Thomas revised his approach. The foundation would continue its big initiatives, but he would focus on being present in his own neighborhood, his own community. Change started small, with individual connections, with daily choices to show up and care. He started a weekly dinner at his brownstone, inviting neighbors and people from St. Mary's. The unlikely mix: billionaire CEO, former homeless individuals, working-class families, elderly couples, created magic. People who'd never normally interact shared meals, stories, laughter. Elijah came to the third dinner. Watching him interact with everyone, seamlessly moving between conversations, making each person feel valued, Thomas realized he was still learning from the boy who'd healed him. After dinner, as they cleaned up together, Thomas said, "You know, you never did take the $4 billion I offered. I don't need $4 billion. I need exactly what I have: community, purpose, enough." Elijah dried a plate. "But you could do something with that money that would honor the healing you received." "What?" "Build something that lasts beyond you. Not a building with your name on it. Something living, growing, that continues helping people long after both of us are gone." The idea took root. Over the following months, Thomas worked with Elijah, Margaret, and others to create something unprecedented: a network of community healing centers. Not hospitals, not clinics, but spaces where people could receive medical care, mental health support, practical help, and community connection. All free, all dignified, all centered on healing the whole person, not just treating symptoms. The first center opened in the neighborhood where Thomas had met Elijah. On opening day, hundreds of people came, not just for services, but to celebrate. Musicians played, children ran through the garden, elders sat in the shade sharing stories. It wasn't a medical facility. It was a living community. Thomas stood watching with Elijah, tears in his eyes. "This is what I was supposed to do with my life. Not build a pharmaceutical empire. This." "No," Elijah corrected gently. "You needed the pharmaceutical empire to learn what you're learning now. Every experience, even the painful ones, even the misguided ones, brought you here. To this moment. To this purpose. It's all part of the same journey." That night, Thomas had his 6-month follow-up scan. Dr. Harrison reviewed the results with amazement that had become routine. Still no cancer. Organs functioning perfectly. "Thomas, you're healthier now than you were 10 years ago. Your blood pressure, cholesterol, everything has improved. Whatever you're doing, it's working on every level." "I'm living," Thomas said simply. "Really living. Finally." 1 year after his diagnosis, Thomas received an unexpected call. Sarah, his first ex-wife, wanted to meet for coffee. They'd been talking occasionally since his apology, but this felt different. More intentional. They met at a small cafe in Brooklyn, near Thomas's brownstone. Sarah looked older but somehow more vibrant than he remembered. Life had marked her, but not defeated her. "You look good," she said, studying him. "Happy. I never saw you happy when we were married." "I wasn't. I didn't know how to be." Thomas stirred his coffee. "I'm still learning. But I'm trying. I heard about your foundation. The healing centers. The price reductions." Sarah smiled. "You're becoming the man I always hoped you could be." "Too late for us, though. Too late for that kind of us. But maybe not too late for a different kind." Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand. "Thomas, I'm sick. Breast cancer. Stage 3. I start treatment next week." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Sarah, no. I'm so sorry. Whatever you need, the best doctors, experimental treatments, anything." "I know. And I appreciate it. But that's not why I'm telling you." She squeezed his hand. "I'm telling you because you're the only person who really understands what it's like to face mortality. And I'm scared." Thomas moved his chair closer, taking both her hands. "Tell me about it. The fear. All of it." They talked for 3 hours. Sarah shared her terror, not just of death, but of dying alone, of leaving things unsaid, of a life unlived. Thomas shared his own journey through that same darkness and how Elijah had shown him another way. "Will you introduce me to him?" Sarah asked. "This healer boy?" "Yes." "But Sarah, I need to tell you something important. He can't guarantee physical healing. That's not how it works. But he can help you heal in other ways. Ways that matter just as much." Thomas brought Sarah to St. Mary's the next day. Elijah greeted her with the same gentle presence he'd shown Thomas a year ago. "I can't promise to cure your cancer," Elijah told her honestly. "But I can help you find peace with whatever comes. And I can teach you what Thomas is learning, that healing isn't just about the body. It's about becoming whole in your spirit." Over the following months, Sarah began her own journey. Chemotherapy, radiation, the physical battle against cancer. But also the spiritual work, confronting her fears, repairing relationships, discovering what mattered most. Thomas was there for her. Not as an ex-husband, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a friend who understood. They talked about their failed marriage with new honesty and less blame. They forgave each other for the ways they'd hurt each other. They even laughed about the absurdity of their younger selves. "We were so stupid," Sarah said one day during her treatment, "thinking marriage was about romance and passion. It's really about showing up when things are hard. Being present through the ugly parts." "I never learned that until I almost died," Thomas admitted. "You tried to teach me. I wasn't ready to learn. And now I'm learning. Slowly. Imperfectly. But learning." Sarah's treatment was grueling, but she endured it with grace that awed Thomas. And slowly, remarkably, she began to improve. Not as dramatically as Thomas had, but measurably. Her tumors shrank. Her energy returned. Her doctors were cautiously optimistic. "You're both miracles," Elijah told them one day at the healing center. "Not because you survived cancer, but because you survived yourselves. You faced your fears, opened your hearts, and chose connection over isolation. That's the real healing." By the 1-year anniversary of Thomas's remission, both he and Sarah were cancer-free. They celebrated at the healing center with the community they'd built: neighbors, shelter residents, foundation workers, people they'd helped and people who'd helped them. Frank proposed a toast, "To Thomas and Sarah, who taught us that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. And to Elijah, who sees healing in everyone and helps us see it in ourselves." Thomas looked around the room, at faces he'd come to know and love, at a community built on vulnerability and mutual support, at a life he'd never imagined possible a year ago. He found Elijah in the corner, talking quietly with a new arrival who looked as lost as Thomas had been. The work continued. The healing centers were expanding to other cities. The foundation had helped thousands. Pharmaceutical prices were slowly dropping across the industry as other companies reluctantly followed Blackwell's lead. But more importantly, Thomas had learned what Elijah had tried to teach him from the beginning, that healing wasn't a destination but a practice. That connection wasn't a luxury but a necessity. That vulnerability wasn't weakness but courage. That night, lying in bed in his Brooklyn brownstone, listening to the sounds of his neighborhood, sirens, laughter, music, life, Thomas felt something he'd never felt before: contentment. Not the absence of challenges or pain, but a deep sense of being exactly where he was meant to be. His phone buzzed. A text from Elijah: "Proud of you. You've remembered how to be human. That's the greatest healing of all." Thomas smiled, typing back, "You saved my life." Elijah's response came quickly: "No. You saved your own life. I just reminded you that you could." And that, Thomas realized, was the truth of it. Healing wasn't something done to you. It was something you chose, every day, in 1,000 small ways. Choosing connection over isolation. Vulnerability over armor. Presence over distraction. Love over fear. The cancer might return someday. Life might bring new challenges, new losses, new reasons to build walls again. But Thomas knew now what he hadn't known before. He had the tools to face whatever came. Not money, not power, not control. Community. Connection. The courage to keep showing up, keep being present, keep choosing love even when it was hard. That was the real fortune Elijah had given him. And unlike money, it was something that only grew when shared. 5 years after that first touch, Thomas stood in the garden of the 10th Healing Center, watching Elijah, now a young man, teach others the principles of holistic healing. What had begun as one miracle had become a community. Dozens of healers carried the philosophy forward, healing the whole person, not just the body. Sarah, healthy and radiant, now directed the foundation. Margaret led training programs. Jake ran addiction recovery. Maria coordinated support for survivors. The centers had spread to 30 cities, and the idea behind them spread even further, into medical schools, organizations, and communities. "Elijah's leaving," Sarah said quietly. Thomas was shaken, but Elijah was calm. "The work here is established. Others will carry it forward. I plant seeds. I don't stay to rule the garden." That evening, they watched the sunset together. "You don't need a teacher anymore," Elijah told him. "You are one now. When you forget, you'll remember again. That's being human." On Elijah's last day, the community gathered. He spoke simply: healing requires courage, the courage to feel, to connect, to be vulnerable. Keep choosing connection over fear. That's how healing spreads. After Elijah left, the work didn't weaken, it grew stronger. Because it was never about one healer, but about ordinary people choosing to stay open and human. Thomas continued serving, leading the foundation, and living simply. He remarried Sarah in a quiet ceremony surrounded by their community. Together, they visited healing centers, listening to stories of transformation, veterans finding peace, families escaping poverty, people rediscovering purpose. On the 10th anniversary of his diagnosis, Thomas spoke publicly. 10 years ago, I was dying, not just from cancer, but from isolation and fear. A boy touched me, and everything changed. The miracle wasn't the healing of my body, but learning that another way of living was possible. Healing lives in connection, in vulnerability, in presence. Find your Elijah. Find your community. And do the daily work of showing up. After the applause, Thomas stayed, listening to individuals one by one. This, being present for another human, was what he had been saved to do. That night, sitting in his garden with Sarah, Thomas reflected. "I don't miss who I was," he said. "I'm grateful for the journey that brought me here. Today, I'm alive. I'm present. I'm connected. In this moment, I'm healed." Under the stars, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city, Thomas celebrated not survival, but transformation. One touch had changed everything, rippling outward endlessly. The legacy lived on, not in wealth or buildings, but in every person who chose connection over isolation. One touch. One transformation. And healing passed forward. The end.